The study had always been my refuge, a place where time slowed down and the chaos of the outside world felt distant. It was a warm April afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, the kind of day where the golden light filtered through the magnolias and made everything seem timeless. I sat at the old oak desk, my father's desk, with a leather-bound journal open in front of me. The scent of the aged paper, mingled with the faint aroma of the room's polished wood, was as comforting as a childhood memory. I'd stumbled upon the journal while sorting through the shelves earlier that week, tucked between volumes of forgotten novels. Its pages were a time capsule, filled with my father's looping handwriting. Reading it felt like discovering a version of him I'd never known. His thoughts, his regrets, his quiet joys. Yet, there was a sadness running through the entries, something heavy and unspoken that gnawed at me. I was so engrossed that I didn't hear Evelyn until she was standing in the doorway. "Lost in your thoughts again?" she asked, her voice soft and lilting. Startled, I looked up. There she was, impeccably dressed in a cream sweater and tailored gray slacks, her chestnut hair framing her face in perfect waves. Evelyn had always had a way of commanding a room without trying. "I didn't hear you come in," I said, closing the journal instinctively. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, her eyes scanning the study. Her gaze lingered on the bookshelves, the desk, the faint light streaming through the tall windows. "This room always felt like a world apart, didn't it?" "It still does," I said, watching as she traced her fingers along the edge of the bookshelf, her movements almost reverent. "This was his sanctuary," she murmured, more to herself than to me. Then she turned to me, and her eyes soft the air between us shifted, subtle but undeniable. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "I don't think I'll ever be like him," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. Evelyn smiled faintly, though there was a wistfulness in it. "You're more like him than you realize. He had a quiet strength, too." She moved closer, her presence filling the room in a way that was both comforting and disarming. Her eyes flicked to the journal I'd hastily closed. Was that his? I hesitated before nodding. "I found it on the shelf. It's different," reading his words instead of hearing them. She lingered beside me, her gaze fixed on the desk. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the journal. For some reason, I hesitated before sliding it across the desk to her. Evelyn picked it up carefully, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. She opened it to a random page, her eyes scanning the text. "It's like a window into his soul," she said softly. Then, as if realizing she'd said too much, she closed the journal and placed it back on the desk. "Thank you for sharing that." As she turned to leave, I thought the moment had passed. But just before stepping out of the room, she paused. "You've grown into someone he'd be proud of," she said, her voice quiet but steady. And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the journal and the unsettled feeling her words had stirred in me. That evening, after dinner, the house was quiet. Henry, the family's longtime housekeeper, had finished his duties and retired for the night. I found myself back in the study, unable to resist the pull of the journal. The words felt different now, as if Evelyn's presence had unlocked a new layer of meaning in them. The entry I was reading was dated 10 years ago, shortly before my father's illness took a turn for the worse. It was full of reflections on life, on love, and on the things he wished he had done differently. One passage caught my eye. "I worry that I've left too much unsaid, that the people I love don't truly know how much they mean to me. I've been so caught up in the roles I've played, husband, father, provider, that I've forgotten how to simply be. If only I had more time." The words felt like a confession, one I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The soft click of heels on the floor pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned to see Evelyn standing in the doorway again, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You're here again," she said, her voice warm but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "It's a hard room to leave," I admitted, closing the journal. She stepped inside, her movements deliberate. "I've been thinking about you," she said, her tone soft. "About us." The words caught me off guard. "Us?" She nodded, her gaze meeting mine. "We've never really talked, Have we? Not about anything important. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I suppose we haven't. Evelyn moved closer, her presence both magnetic and unnerving. I've always admired you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The way you see people, the way you listen. I tried to brush off the warmth her words stirred in me, but it lingered. I've admired you too, I admitted. You've always seemed untouchable, confident. She laughed softly, a sound that was both light and bittersweet. I'm not as confident as you think. The space between us felt charged, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Evelyn reached out, her hand brushing against mine. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me. Evelyn, I began, but she shook her head. You don't have to say anything, she said, her eyes searching mine. I just needed you to know how I feel. And with that, she turned and left the study, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. The journal lay on the desk, forgotten, as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But deep down, I knew. This was a moment that would change everything. The days after Evelyn's confession were a blur of confusion and questions I didn't know how to answer. I avoided the study, its once comforting stillness now haunted by the memory of her hand brushing mine. The journal sat untouched on the desk, its words no longer a solace but a mirror reflecting my turmoil. Evelyn and I barely crossed paths in those first days. When we did, it was in passing. Her soft smile, the lingering gaze that held more questions than I was ready to face. I told myself I was imagining it, that whatever had happened in the study was a fleeting moment born of shared grief. But deep down, I knew better. It all came to a head one evening when I couldn't sleep. I wandered downstairs, intending to pour myself a glass of water, but the faint glow of light spilling from the study door stopped me. Evelyn was inside. She stood by the window, her silhouette illuminated by the soft glow of the desk lamp. In one hand, she held the journal, her fingers absently tracing its worn edges. The other hand rested on the windowsill, her gaze fixed on something distant. I didn't mean to intrude, I said from the doorway, my voice startlingly loud in the quiet room. She turned, her expression unreadable. You're not intruding, she said softly, setting the journal down. I was just thinking. I hesitated before stepping inside, my bare feet sinking into the plush rug. About what? She studied me for a moment, her gaze searching. About him. About us. About everything. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. Evelyn crossed the room, her movements slow and deliberate, until she stood just a few feet away. You've been avoiding me, she said, her tone gentle but firm. I haven't, I lied, my voice faltering under the weight of her stare. She smiled faintly, a knowing look in her eyes. You have, and I understand why, but we can't pretend nothing happened. Evelyn, I began, but she shook her head, cutting me off. Let me finish, she said. I know this is complicated, but I need you to understand something. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto mine. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. Not since your father. Her words hit me like a wave, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Evelyn, whatever this is, it's wrong. Is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Or is it just something we don't want to face? I turned away, my hands gripping the back of the chair for support. We can't do this. It's not fair to him. To us. It's not about fairness, she said, stepping closer. It's about honesty. And the truth is, we've both been lying to ourselves. Her hand touched my shoulder, and I felt a shiver run through me. I'm not asking for anything, she said softly. I just needed you to know how I feel. What you choose to do with that is up to you. I couldn't look at her, couldn't face the emotions swirling inside me. Without another word, I left the study, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. The next morning, I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. Evelyn acted as if nothing had happened, her composure unshaken. But every glance, every shared moment, carried the weight of what was unspoken. That evening, during dinner, she broke the silence. I've been thinking, she said, her tone casual but her gaze intent. About making some changes around here. Changes? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. This house feels too big for just the two of us, she said. I think it might be time to downsize. The words felt like a punch to the gut. You want to sell the house? It's just a thought, she said, her tone light, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I thought maybe we could find somewhere smaller, somewhere new. I didn't respond. The idea of leaving this house, my father's sanctuary, felt like losing him all over again. Evelin must have sensed my hesitation because she reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. We don't have to decide now, she said. It's just something to think about. Her touch lingered, and I felt the familiar warmth spread through me, mingled with guilt and confusion. A week later, I found myself back in the study, unable to resist its pull. The journal lay open on the desk, and I began to read, hoping to find some clarity in my father's words. One entry stood out. Life is full of gray areas, moments when the lines between right and wrong blur. It's in those moments that we discover who we really are. The choices we make, the truths we face, they define us more than anything else. I closed the journal, my father's words echoing in my mind. Evelin appeared in the doorway, her presence as steady as ever. You've been quiet lately, she said, stepping inside. I looked at her, my heart heavy. I've been thinking. About what? She asked, her voice gentle. About us, I admitted, my voice trembling. About what this means. Evelin moved closer, her gaze unwavering. And what have you decided? I hesitated, the weight of my father's words pressing down on me. I don't know, I said finally, but I know we can't keep going like this. She nodded, her expression a mixture of understanding and sadness. I never meant to complicate things, she said. I just wanted you to see me. I do see you, I said, my voice breaking, but I don't know if I can face what that means. The room fell silent, the unspoken truths between us thicker than ever. And in that moment, I realized there were no easy answers. Only choices. The days after that conversation in the study were suffocating. The house, once a place of comfort, felt like a battlefield strewn with invisible wounds. Evelin and I moved around each other cautiously, as if every glance and every word might ignite something neither of us could control. I spent most of my time in the study, trying to lose myself in my father's journal, but his words only reminded me of the choices I was too afraid to make. Evelin was right. There was something between us, something undeniable, but acknowledging it would mean unraveling everything, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to face what came next. One evening, Evelin and I found ourselves in the living room, a bottle of wine sitting between us. It was a rare moment of quiet, the tension between us tempered by the weight of unspoken words. We can't keep living like this, Evelin said finally, her voice cutting through the silence. I know, I replied, staring into my glass. She sighed, leaning back against the couch. I've been thinking about what you said. About us, about this house, about everything. And I think it's time for me to go, she said, her tone steady but laced with sadness. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Go where? I have a friend in Charleston, she said. She's been asking me to visit for years. Maybe it's time I take her up on the offer. For how long? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Evelin met my eyes, her gaze soft but unwavering. I don't know. Maybe for good. The room fell silent, the enormity of her words settling between us. I wanted to argue, to ask her to stay, but I couldn't, because deep down, I knew she was right. The morning she left, the house felt emptier than ever. I stood in the driveway, watching as she loaded the last of her bags into the car. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice breaking. Evelin turned to me, her expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. I don't know what else to do, she said. We've both been running in circles, afraid to face what this means. Maybe some distance will help us figure it out. She stepped closer, her hand brushing mine one last time. You'll be okay, she said softly. I'm not so sure, I replied, tears welling in my eyes. She smiled faintly, her own eyes glistening. You're stronger than you think. And then she was gone, the sound of her car fading into the distance. The weeks that followed were a blur of silence and self-reflection. The study became my refuge once more, the journal my only companion. I read it cover to cover, searching for some kind of answer, some kind of closure. One passage stood out, etched into my memory like a scar. We spend so much of our lives avoiding the truth, afraid of what it might cost us. But the truth has a way of finding us, whether we're ready for it or not. And when it does, we have a choice, to face it or to run. The choice we make defines who we are. My father's words echoed in my mind as I stared out the window, the sky painted in shades of lavender and gold. I realized I'd spent too long running, from my grief, from my feelings, from the truth. Evelin's departure had forced me to confront everything I'd been avoiding. And though the answers weren't easy, they were clear. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling as I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" "It's me," I said, my voice unsteady. "Hi," she replied, her tone cautious but warm. There was a long silence, the weight of everything we hadn't said filling the space between us. I wanted to thank you," I said finally, "for everything. For being honest, even when I wasn't ready to hear it." Evelin sighed softly. "You didn't call just to thank me, did you?" "No," I admitted. "I called because I'm ready to face the truth. About us, about what this all means." "And what does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, my father's words echoing in my mind. "It means I'm done running." Evelin didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I thought the call had dropped. But then she spoke, her voice steady and clear. "Neither am I." Months later, the house felt different. The study was still my sanctuary, but it no longer felt haunted by what-ifs and regrets. Evelin returned to Savannah, and though things weren't easy, we began to rebuild. Our relationship, our understanding of each other, our lives. The journal remained on the desk, a constant reminder of the past and the lessons it had taught me. My father's words were no longer just reflections of his life. They were a guide for mine. Life didn't return to what it was before. It couldn't. But in its place, something new began to grow. Something honest, something real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't running anymore.